to have us with us today, Arnold Roth, has gone through probably the very worst thing that any parent could possibly go through. As you know, my name is Sarah Stern, and I'm the founder and president of AMET. And welcome to yet another extremely timely and extremely topical AMET webinar. AMET, as you know, is an unabashedly pro-Israel and pro-American policy shop in our nation's capital. We write and publish at least one article a week and are on the Hill practically every day during the week. Staffers from members of Congress and sometimes even the members themselves tell us that they've grown to rely on us for our objective, accurate, and timely information, particularly in times such as what happened over the last weekend, when over 1,100 rockets or missiles were raining down into the people in southern Israel all the way up to Tel Aviv, and they had to stay in their sailrooms. I must say this, I've been told by my board, but please consider making a meaningful contribution in order to support our valuable work to Congress and in order to keep the sources of information alive, which we can stream right into your very own living rooms every week. This past Sunday evening, we Jews had finished commemorating the 3 weeks, which led up to the 9 days of mourning that had led up to Tisha B'Av, the day that commemorates the destruction of the 2 holy temples, one in 586 BCE and one in 70 CE. That had led to, after 2,000 years of our exile, for us to finally return to our ancient Jewish homeland. With the end of Tisha B'Av, most of the Jewish community, learned to put our sadness aside and to gradually return to appreciate the joy in living. However, if you are one of the most unfortunate parents who have had to witness the horrific tragedy of having lost a child, that return to joy never truly ends. On August 9th, just yesterday, we commemorated the 21st anniversary of perhaps one of the worst terrorist suicide bombings that has ever occurred in the world. Ahlam Tamimi had staked out and identified the Sbarro pizzeria on the corner of King George Street and Jaffa Street. She selected that site personally because many young Orthodox families dined there. She brought with him Izzeldin Chahala Masri, who brought with him a guitar case that was loaded with dynamite, nuts, screws, and bolts. He calmly ate his lunch, finished it, and then proceeded to detonate his guitar case. What ensued rocked most of Western Jerusalem. There were 15 among the dead, which included 3 Americans, Judith Greenwald, age 31, who was pregnant at the time, Hannah Nachenberg, whose 2-year-old daughter was with her, and she was one of the very few who managed to get out unscathed, and of course, 15-year-old Malki Roth, the daughter of Arnold and Roth. I can only categorize her as a human monster. Ahlam Tamimi had said in her own words afterwards when she took the bus. She said the Palestinians around Damascus Gate in Jerusalem were all smiling. You could sense that everybody was happy. When I got on the bus, nobody knew that it was it was me, she said, who had led the suicide bomber to the target. I was feeling quite strange because I had left the bomber Izzeldin behind. But inside the bus, they were all congratulating one another. They didn't even know one another, yet they were exchanging greetings. While I was sitting on the bus, the driver turned on the radio. But first, let me tell you about the gradual rise in the number of casualties while I was on the bus and everybody was congratulating one another After hearing an initial report that 3 people were killed in the bombing, Tamidi stated, "I admit that I was a bit disappointed because I had hoped for a larger toll. Yet, when they said 3 dead, I said, Allah be praised. 2 minutes later, they said on the radio that the number had increased to 5. I wanted to hide my smile, but I just couldn't. Allah be praised. They were all smiling and applauding and handing out candies." Ahlam Tamimi in 2011, unfortunately, was released together with 1,026 other brutal terrorists with blood on their hands, Hamas terrorists, in exchange for the captured soldier Gilad Shalit. I think it's very, very important that people around the world know that this kind of evil is what the nation of Israel is up against. And it is because of the constant incitement to hate and kill the Jew, the demonization of the Jew and the Israeli, and sometimes the Christian, and the constant exhortation to become a martyr and to recognize that Israel is invisible, but that they will return once again to all of Palestine from the river to the sea, and that it is all theirs. So without further ado, I want to talk a little bit to this wonderful, wonderful man, Arnold Roth, who has been to hell and back with his family. And I want to ask him, first of all, about his pursuit of justice, which seems to be unending.
First of all, Sarah, it's a real privilege to be here with you. I don't know that there's anybody who's been more effective and helpful in getting us to where we are than you and Emmet, and I will always owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude as well as enormous admiration. Pursuit of justice is the right way to describe what we're engaged in, but it's one of those very strange pursuits of justice where the people who are supposed to be doing the justice are really at the heart of the problem. I know that most people here will have walked into this event with some understanding of how we got here, but I would just about guarantee to everyone listening and watching that there are dimensions to this that will still be upsetting to you and probably new. And I always make the joke about how this is only a 2.5-hour event and therefore we won't be able to squeeze all the information into it. And I know that we have much less time than that, but it's really not a joke when I say that having been trying to get justice done for well over 10 years, I know that there are dimensions, aspects, incidents, and particularities in this story that will make people's hair stand on end. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who have caused the justice to be frustrated and blocked are people who most people will admire. And the most important thing I think I can say to any American audience is that we certainly have never approached getting Ahlam Tamimi prosecuted and imprisoned in US domestic political terms. That's a very important thing because being involved in expressing viewpoints to people in public places and especially in social media, I've grown terribly accustomed, and I've got the scars to show it, with reactions that say, oh yes, but you know, Obama is an idiot and Trump is obviously going to solve the problem. And equally people who say, oh yes, Trump is an idiot and of course Biden is going to solve the problem, and so on and so on. And I don't need to hammer the point home because I know you and I have discussed this, but no aspect of what we're doing, not I, not Frimit, my wife, is rooted in any view of the way American politics is done. From our point of view, almost everybody at the highest levels of politics in the United States is part of the problem. To a great extent, the Jewish leadership in the United States, in Jewish organizations, are part of the problem. There are many people that I've known for much of my adult life with whom I now find it very difficult to even express my viewpoint on this. The essence of what I'm sort of walking around is that we're involved in the pursuit of justice, and we're being blocked by people for whom justice takes a back seat to political expediency. I don't know two more obscene words at this stage in my life than those words, political expediency. Tamimi, along with the 1,026 terrorists that you mentioned, more than half of whom, I emphasize this point, more than half of whom were murderers. It's never been said in the media. I don't know if anybody has ever done the calculations that I've done, but I say it affirmatively. More than half of them were murderers, were freed in order to get an Israeli soldier returned. The argument that was put to the Israeli public was bogus and dishonest and misleading, and then began the game with the United States. The game, and I'm not making a speech about this, I'm trying to throw some issues onto the table so that we can discuss them, is that we went to the Department of Justice right after the Shalit deal and were very generously received there. The Department of Justice immediately began the process of getting this woman prosecuted under US federal law using a law that has been on the books for years but had never once been applied to a Palestinian Arab murderer of Americans in Israel. That's the framework within which this conversation today is taking place. Had never once been applied. There's no good reason for this. It's only a disgrace to all of those involved. But the Justice Department people, I emphasize the point, have been generous and good and supportive, as have the FBI. The problems are very real and they're not there, starting with the fact that as soon as the judge signed off on the arrest order and the other formalities that came with that, that was all put under seal and stayed under seal from 2013, roughly a year after I was in Washington, until March 2017. In my book, that's a very long time. And then when it was made public, we were stunned to see how many doors were slammed in our faces. We had questions. The questions have gone unanswered until this day. We had arguments that we wanted to put. We found that there was no address for putting those arguments. And before I hand the baton back to you, Sarah, on this part of our conversation, let me say that where Jewish leaders, American Jewish leaders, should have been in the vanguard of every aspect of the things that I'm talking about here, for reasons that I'm not going to detail here, and and I'm certainly not going to name names, they have been not only not part of the solution, but in large measure part of the problem.
That's incredibly disappointing. What about this saying we were all raised with Kol Yisrael Arevan Zelazeh, that every single Jew is supposed to be responsible for one another? So before we engage in every detail of the frustration, can you paint a picture of who Malki was? She was an extraordinarily compassionate and beautiful woman, I know, a young woman who wanted to spend her life as a special educator. Can you fill in the blanks?
Not really, no, but I'll throw out a few points for people to at least take on board. Malki never reached her 16th birthday, so as generous as your comment is that she was a young woman, she was just barely a young woman. She was just a wonderful girl, the oldest of our 4 daughters, the middle child in a family of 7 children. And the really distinctive thing about her was the way she embraced her youngest sister. The youngest of our children was born perfect and absolutely beautiful. All of our children are beautiful. This is probably surprising to most people, but it's true. Our children are beautiful, at least in the eyes of their parents. But our youngest child became desperately sick in her first year of life and ended up, as she is today, brain damaged and blind and completely dependent on her family and uncommunicative in every possible respect. Malki adored her, embraced her. She knew what a heartbreaker her sister, whose name is Chaya Elisheva, is and what was and still is, but felt that there was so much she, Malki, could do to just make her sister happy. And the example that I give, because it's always at the top of my mind and I can't shake it loose in my own memory, is seeing Malki pick up her sister in her arms at the end of the day from the bed, which was always in the middle of our house. She was on the sofa in the daytime and then in her bed at night. And bring her into Malki's own bed so that she could be close to Malki and feel the warmth and feel the love. Malki never heard a word of appreciation from Chaya. Chaya doesn't speak. She certainly hears, but she doesn't speak. And I have to say that given how young she was 10 when Chaya came into our lives, or when the serious problems began. This reflected an engagement with life that most of us never actually grow into. She was extraordinary in this respect. It doesn't stop there, but we could spend the next 2.5 hours of this time that you've allocated to our presentation here today, Sarah, talking about what a wonderful person Malki was. And it's not just because she was then murdered before she became 16 years old, but that's the fact. She was really extraordinary.
Yes. So there were many, many highs and many, many lows. Can you tell us some of the periods of highs when you seem to have a sense of hope? I remember I was honored to have received a text from you in 2017, March 14th, 2017, when you said you had just met with FBI agents and they unveiled the fact that she was going to be faced with charges, or Ahlam Tamimi was going, and made an extradition request to Jordan.
The 14th of March 2017 is the date that you're referring to. It was just after Shushan Purim in Jerusalem, which is a day later than regular Purim in the rest of the world. And we and the family of Shoshana Greenbaum went to a certain hotel downtown, and we met not just with the FBI, but with the pursuit team in the Department of Justice, some of the finest people in public office that I've ever met. They didn't tell us what they'd asked us to come and meet them for, and then quickly got to the point and said what you've just said, Sarah, that in 3 hours from now in Washington, charges which we haven't been able to tell you about, which was signed off in 2013, I have to say I almost fell off my chair when I heard that, are going to be announced. And then they ran through a list of all the other things that were going to be announced. She was going to be added and was added to the FBI most wanted terrorists list, a list I'd never heard of, and various other things. It all sounded too good to be true. I think they knew that it would have that effect on us. But then things started to fall into place pretty much after we left the hotel, starting with what is this thing called the FBI Most Wanted Terrorists list? And I went online as soon as I got out of the car at home and discovered that everybody on the FBI Most Wanted Terrorists list, which had at that stage, I think 28 people on it, today there are 24, had a prize on their head. The prize came from, well, actually, I would want to ask people, but I can't, this isn't interactive. Where does one imagine a $5 million prize on the head of a terrorist who is a fugitive? And in the case of Tamimi, the most wanted fugitive in the United States today, where would that money come from? And the answer is counterintuitive. It comes from the State Department. Now, as it happens, all of the aggravation on the American side that we've had in this, the story down right through the years, I shouldn't say all, but the overwhelming majority of it comes from the State Department, not the Obama State Department, not the Trump State Department, not the Biden State Department, all of them. And there have been exceptions. There have been people there who have demonstrated their warmth and their backbone by giving us information that we found to be very useful. But by and large, it's really been tremendously aggravating. But we found that the first issue that we raised, the very first question was, well, this one has 5 million, this one has 5 million, this one, they've all got $5 million prizes on their head. What about Tamimi? You must have forgotten. Those were the words I used. You must have forgotten. I said that to the Justice Department guy. And I could go into the detail because I think when we make the movie or write the book or prepare the opera, some of these moments will really strike people. But the outcome of it was that I found the person in charge of the particular department in the State Department the prize, and I called her and then called her again, and eventually left a voice message and have yet to hear from her. This was in 2017. A lot of things have happened in the interim, which all make for a sort of, you've put it, highs and lows, but there are far more lows than there have been highs. Yes, we felt that the justice system was cranking itself up to do something that everybody could be proud of. And within 24 hours, it became clear to us that there were countervailing forces in the US government. And the most upsetting aspect of it, from that day until today, is no one wants to tell us what we've already figured out years ago is really going on, which is that in our calculations here in the United States government, irrespective of whether we're Democrats or Republicans or independents or anything else, we really appreciate the relationship that the United States has with Jordan and with its king. He's a tough, he's a strategic and loyal ally, as President Biden called him, in a tough neighborhood. Now, I'm not dumb, and I understand the importance of strategic blah, blah, but I can read between the lines as well. And I know a lot about Jordan. In some ways, I think I know more than most of the people with whom I interact in the US government. Jordan's a hotbed of anti-Semitic sentiment. The king has never done anything, as far as anyone knows, and I've spoken to a lot of people, to try to stem the anti-Semitism, which is deeply institutionalized in its schools and can be experienced by anyone who has this wonderful tool called Google Translate. You've all got it under your noses at this moment. Go into the Jordanian media, type in, or I'll send you a copy of the Arabic text, the name of Ahlam Tamimi in Arabic, and you will not find a single article, not one, not a social media comment, not a published analysis which says, boy, this woman really embarrasses us. It's such a disgrace that we're all lined up behind a woman whose only claim to fame is that she murdered the children that she identified as being likely to be there in a crowd at 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon during school vacation time. That's what made her famous. It's what makes her a celebrity in Jordan today. That, to me, ought to be the end of the discussion. But there's another aspect to it, as you know, Sarah, and that is that Jordan has an extradition treaty with the United States, not a small issue. And here I just want to say the entire analysis in about 2 sentences. The extradition treaty has been exercised in good faith by Jordan and the United States several times. There are Jordanian fugitives who were arrested in Jordan by Jordanian authorities and handed over to the Americans, who are still today and likely to spend the rest of their lives in American prisons. There's no reason why the Tamimi case is any different, except that, as we all know, she is different because she murdered Jewish children and they adore her for it. It has to be said. So that in that particular case, not in the previous cases, the Jordanian government arranged for its highest court, the Court of Cassation, to convene on the Tamimi case 6 days after Motzei Shushan Purim of 2017, when we were given the good news. And the Court of Cassation said, well, there is a technical problem here. Now, let me say the technical problem in my terms, not in their terms. There's a technical problem with the extradition treaty we have with the United States. We made the problem. We are aware of the problem, though we've never talked to anybody about it. We could fix the problem tonight, tomorrow morning, or any day for the past 27 years, I think it was 27 years, that we've been treaty partners with the United States, and we've never done it. So we're declaring this treaty to be invalid. Now, one thing that I want to share that comes after that is that after banging our heads against the State Department front door on this specific issue, we found that it was necessary to avail ourselves of the Freedom of Information Act, which, as everybody probably knows, lets you get documents out of the hands of tight-fisted public officials who don't want to share this information. And what did they do in our case? They kept holding on to the documents, and we were not able to get the documents, so we sued. It's not often that people sue under the FOIA, but we did, and we won. And as a result, we received a bundle of documents that nobody except for our lawyers and my wife and I have seen. There may be a few exceptions of strategic advisors, but no one in public has seen it. And the key document there is a document signed by King Hussein, who is, as you may know, related to King Abdullah II. He's the father. And that document puts beyond any doubt that what the Jordanian court said in 2017, 6 days after the charges against Tamimi were announced, and runs counter to every public statement that the Jordanian government has made about the treaty. And I can tell you there has never been a single such statement, not by the king, not by the prime minister, not by the ambassador of Jordan in Washington. But if they had made the statement, the document that I have in my hand, signed by King Hussein, says, no, you're making this stuff up and we know why. So what do you do with a situation like that? It's like the mother standing at the military parade, seeing her son walking with all the other soldiers and saying to her friends, look at that, he's the only one who's in step. Everyone else is out of step. But that's exactly what I'm saying. Everybody else has fallen victim to, I don't know, let's call it the hypnosis of we have to stand with His Majesty King Abdullah II and with Jordan, because without them, and this is literally what's been told to me again and again and again, even this morning, the sky will fall. And I say, have you all lost your senses? Does America have any principled attachment to its doctrine of justice, first of all, and bilateral engagements with other countries? The answer is yes, but it depends. And that's an awful answer.
Right. I've often felt in dealing with you, Arnold, and Frimet, and so many other victims of Palestinian terrorism, like Jews are just the disposable, invisible victims. They're like some little pawns on a chessboard. In fact, someone from the State Department once told me that the ultimate prize was a two-state solution, and this is the price we have to pay. Unbelievable. So getting back, can you talk a little bit about when you came to the U.S. House Oversight and Reform Committee hearing on February 2nd, 2016, under Chairman Ron DeSantis? Was that one of the high points, or just one that led to more frustration? How did you feel then?
I felt proud to be there with you, first of all, and your Emet colleagues. The experience was interesting. I had a private conversation with Mr. DeSantis, and though I've never gone back to him, I have a sense that he is a kind of an ally in waiting here. And if he ever decides to go into politics again, which I'm told that he might actually do at some level or another, then it may be appropriate to approach him. But this was an investigation, a hearing at which I was invited to give testimony, though I'm not an American citizen. My wife is, my children are, Malki was, which is the key, as to why the Justice Department hasn't delivered the goods. And years have gone by. Well, it's a pity that the Justice Department handled it the way they did, because in the end, it really isn't the Justice Department that's causing the problems here, and it is the State Department, and they weren't asked to give testimony. And our efforts to get the House Foreign Affairs Committee or the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to look into what the State Department has been doing throughout this have ended up in immense frustration. If we had a sort of an extra time here to talk about my frustrations, everyone would be bored, but I'd probably feel better just getting it off my chest. The frustrations that have accompanied this process, mostly with people who either look at you like you're an idiot and don't say anything, or say things that convince me that they are idiots, is at the heart of banging your head against the wall in Washington. It shouldn't be this way. I don't understand why we've constantly run into brick walls. And again, Sarah, the issue that I want to make clear here in my unclear way is, and Jewish leadership should be at the forefront of this battle. They should at least be by our side. And again and again and again, my calls and my emails to some of the most prominent leaders in the American Jewish landscape are unanswered. Or even worse, somebody gives me a patronizing, oh, you don't really understand, or we don't do these things in public, it's all back rooms. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been chasing this woman for justice purposes for 10 years. Does anyone there have any context in which they can say, yes, well, 10 years, you have to keep doing it for another 50 years?
It's outrageous. It's outrageous. So tell us a little bit about all of your efforts, and our efforts actually, because we were helping behind the scenes to write to the Jordanian ambassador, Dina Kawar, and whether or not any of these letters have been answered. They were signed by many members of Congress, unfortunately all Republican, but yet many. Has that led anywhere?
Oh, yeah. Nowhere. She's never responded, but neither have a series of other Jordanian figures. I'll just mention briefly in passing, the most important school for the training of journalists in the entire Arab world is the Jordan Media Institute, which is under the patronage, but under the active management of a half sister-in-law of King Abdullah, a member of the royal family, who used to be an on-camera personality for CNN, which is an American media organization, not an Arab media organization, very talented woman. The students, named Ahlam Tamimi their role model some years ago, and I became aware of it. It was never something that I found other people were very interested in. I was obsessed with it. The most prominent emerging journalists in the Arab world, when asked, decided that this woman, Ahlam Tamimi, who had a tenuous claim to being a journalist, she had studied journalism, she was a newsreader on the night of the massacre that she herself created, and she was one who read the news for the people who watched the Al Istiqlal TV channel. She was their role model, the person they aspired to be. What does that mean? That she writes real good? No, it means that she became famous for something that I have to imagine we all dream about: killing Jewish kids and getting away with it. So it's been immensely frustrating to find that when I engaged with the Jordan Media Institute, with the ambassador of Jordan, with ambassadors of Jordan in other countries as well, the answer has been, that's the answer. Now, what I don't understand about the scenario that I just presented, Sarah, is why other people haven't stepped in who are, unlike me, not persona non grata, but persona grata, people who have access and entree. And I've spoken to, I've had words with foreign ministers of other countries and said to them, why won't you go and engage with the Jordanians, at least with the ambassador in your own country? And I can tell you that it's never come into play. Now, there are those who've said to me, leave the ambassadors alone. The ambassadors, they're just doing a job, but that's untrue. I was particularly upset, and I really don't understand it until this day, that one of the major American Jewish organizations saw fit to give a platform to the particular ambassador you've mentioned. She's been there now for, I think, 4, maybe 5 years, Dina Kawar, very educated, cultured woman, makes a very strong impression. I have nothing against her personally, but she's never acknowledged my existence, never said a word in public about the Tamimi case. And when this Jewish organization gave her a platform at the beginning of COVID, it wasn't me, but friends of mine sent sharp questions, good, intelligent, non-rude questions to the convener of this event. And I can tell you that not one of those questions was asked of Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Jordan. And until this day, and I consider myself a broad-minded and patient person with an endless ability to have my time wasted, I don't understand these people. I don't understand a Jewish organization that creates a platform for the official representative, the person who you call Her Excellency, of a country which is holding safe from American justice a woman whose only claim to fame is that she murdered Jewish children because they were Jewish and because they were children and because she could reach them in a pizzeria. I don't understand the logic. I don't understand the ethics. And it brings to mind at least 2 situations that are not complementary to any of them or to me, because these are issues that I wish we could just keep under the rug, but we can't. One of them is, where was American Jewish leadership during World War II when the Holocaust was taking place? Now, everyone has their own views about this. I'm not about to teach anybody anything. But as I know it, and my parents were in Auschwitz and in the concentration camps that might have been bombed by Roosevelt's planes, they always had a pretty strong view about how upsetting it was that American leadership and American Jewish leadership among them never did what should have been done when Jewish lives were just being spilled down the drain. And also, in a somewhat less dramatic sense, but no less meaningful in my opinion, the early days of the battle for Soviet Jewry. I remember that, and I was very involved in that. Those years I was a student in university in Australia and very involved in doing whatever we could do there. America's organized Jewish leadership was very slow to get involved in fighting for the rights of Soviet Jews. And it was really a grassroots movement with some wonderful efforts made by people who didn't have public office, weren't being paid colossal monthly salaries, and who were doing it out of passion for the fate, the shared fate, the Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh relationship, and eventually prevailed. And the Jewish leadership followed their members and eventually became engaged in all of this. I also want to bring in one other kind of analogy. I have a photograph, which I don't think anybody has ever seen publicly. It's me talking to a delegation of really major leaders, the most major leaders at the time, who came to Jerusalem in more or less the year after my daughter was murdered. Now, it was interesting for me and something that I welcome to be able to stand up in front of a group of American Jewish leaders and talk about how difficult it is to be a family man, a father who's just lost a child to an act of murder, and to know that we're surrounded by people, meaning the Palestinian Arabs, the PLO, the Arafats, Arafat was alive then, who would like to see more such unthinkable losses. And the faces on the peoples of the Jewish American leadership who were there were faces of compassion and empathy. Sarah, most of those organizations will not take my calls today. And what's changed is that the perception is that Frimet and I, the parents of Malki, this is Malki, are asking American Jewish leadership to do something that is contrary to American Jewish interests. And what's interesting about that is it can't be true because nobody actually says it out loud. If it's so important, and if it's a policy that everyone has bought into, they ought to be telling their constituent organizations and the people for whom they speak, and they don't. To me, that's really a serious state of affairs that no one owns up to, and I'm using this opportunity to throw down the gauntlet and to challenge America's Jewish leadership and to say, if you're not with us on pressing for justice in the case of a woman whose only achievement in life has been to murder Jewish kids and to get away with it, then you're against it. You can't be in the middle. There is no fence here. Join us, come with us, help us break into those doors that are closed today, that don't want to hear our voices. That's my call.
What has happened to Arnold is so egregious and so immoral and outrageous, not only on behalf of the Jewish community, but I have to say as an American, on behalf of our own Justice Department. I remember working incredibly hard after my friend Sherry and Seth Mendel's son was killed, Kobe Mendel, and he actually, it's a long story, but it took many years for us to open up the Office of Justice for Victims of Overseas Terrorism. And I remember when it was opened up, Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez said that it is just as important to pursue justice for American victims of terrorism that are outside of our shores than inside our shores, and he would not rest until that justice was pursued. And today, I think they have nothing more than websites with a list of all of the Americans that have been killed abroad. It's outrageous. There's no pursuit. They're not doing their job, and they're not what I worked so many years of my life to have opened up. It's awful. And now, if you will, Arnold, I know we've had many questions that have come in from the audience, and my wonderful colleague and friend Hussein Abubakar Mansour has been fielding these questions, and I'm sure he would like to ask some of them. Hussein?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much, Arnold, for joining us today on such a sad anniversary. And I think I would be speaking for all our audience if I say that I feel saddened and outraged by the behaviors of so many officials from the United States. I don't expect much from the Jordanians, to be honest, but from the United States that refuse to uphold justice for American citizens because of such political considerations. We received the multiple questions from our audience. Please, all our viewers, thank you for joining us, and keep sending us questions either through the Q&A button or through the chat box. The first question that we received is asking, you probably know there is a dissident movement sparked by the Jewish Leadership Project that seeks to light a fire under our communal organization, and it's concerning on domestic anti-Semitism. Should we be doing more about global or about terrorism as well? Are you familiar with this at all?
Yes. I am, and I'm absolutely in sync with the spirit of the people behind the essentially the Replace the Jewish Leadership project. That's the way I think it really manifests itself. I'm not an American, and my fate is tied to whoever is in the Knesset and the Keystone Cops nature of Israeli politics, which can be very, very depressing. And I don't get involved in that either. At this stage in my life, I really am focused on getting justice done. And if that leaves other issues by the side, I apologize, but that's my reality today.
Thank you. We've received a multiple questions asking you to identify the organization that hosted the Jordanian ambassador. So can you do that, or would you rather not?
Sure. Does everyone have a pen and paper?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so no, I won't. I'm not in the business of getting revenge, or I'm not interested in doing any damage to the fabric of American Jewish leadership. What I am interested in doing, very interested in doing, is taking issues that I have sat on or that have been sitting on me for years and beginning to bring them out. I have to say that there's been a turning point, and the turning point happened only 4 weeks ago. And at the risk of saying things that some people might know, last year when King Abdullah II was going to be received in the Oval Office, and in fact, in due course was received, Fremont and I had a really lucky break thanks to other people's help. And we had an open letter to President Biden published in the Wall Street Journal. And if I may say so, it was a good letter. It raised good questions, and there wasn't one of them, none of the comments, even the comments about things that he said in his inauguration speech, that didn't belong in the Wall Street Journal. I'm glad the open letter appeared. And of course, no one from the White House ever responded. So when we heard that President Biden was coming to be staying in Jerusalem, walking distance, his hotel would be from where we live, I wrote another letter with my wife, and we had it delivered to the Oval Office the night before President Biden left to come here. And what happened after that, this is really a turning point for me. One of the major news agencies that has an operation here in Israel was really remarkably helpful in giving some transparency to what happened. The letter arrived. I got the word back from the news agency, a big American international organization, that a team has been formed in the Oval Office to prepare a response. 24 hours later, I was told by the same source, they've been working on it for 24 hours and they've just given us the response. And the response is, we are not going to respond to the Roths. And indeed, they were as good as their word. They never did respond to the Roths, but thankfully, the major news organization published what the Oval Office had said. To me, I have to say, and there's nothing personal and there's not even anything political about this, this reflects the failure of American leadership in my eyes. If you're afraid to talk to the parents of Malki Roth, but you're falling over yourselves, I shouldn't get myself too cooked up about this, and you're making energetic efforts to accommodate the concerns of the family of Shireen Abu Akleh, the reporter for Al Jazeera, a newspaper that has published remarkably supportive articles about Ahram Tamimi, a woman who was killed in a firefight in Jenin. You're falling over yourselves. You don't have a suspect. You don't have a gun. You don't have a bullet. You don't have anything. You're falling over yourselves to invite the family to come to Washington. We'll take care of you. And you say, and the Roths, we're not going to respond to them. To me, I'm sorry, but that changed the rules of the game for me. No one is ever going to hear from me anything offensive publicly or anything threatening publicly, nor is that the nature of my wife. But for heaven's sake, if this isn't a Jewish issue that gets people upset and that calls for action, I don't know what is. And when I say a Jewish issue, I really mean a Jewish issue about American law. This is the part that just baffles me. The Jordanians are subject to international law by reason of a treaty, which even the State Department says they certainly are bound by. But the Jordanians say no, and the Americans, the expression that my wife uses is, the Americans, or the Jordanians are the tail that wags the American dog today. It's just incomprehensible.
Thank you, Arnold. We have another question asking, would it be accurate to say that when it comes to this issue, President Trump was no more helpful than President Obama?
President Obama was not helpful. President Trump was not helpful. President Biden was not helpful. The ambassadors of the United States during this period have been unhelpful. The secretaries of state, and there have been several of them, who've passed through Israel and who've been aware of our issue, have not been helpful. I'm using the word have not been helpful in order to convey the idea that they have stood with the Jordanians in order to suppress justice and to throw the case of my daughter's murder and the murders of the other innocents murdered that day, of whom 2 were Americans, a third is still alive, but has been in a vegetative state all these years, Hannah Nachenberg, under the rug. What do you say about people who throw your child under the rug? You can't really say very much. And if you allow your emotions to overtake you, people will just be offended. But that's the situation. In the case of Mike Pompeo, who I believe is going to make another run for the Knesset, or whatever Congress will have him in the near future, we did something that we'd never thought of doing in our lives, Frimet and me. We bought 1/3 of the front page of the Jerusalem Post, which is an English language newspaper, on the day that we knew that he'd be sitting in a Jerusalem hotel having breakfast, and probably, if he didn't read the newspaper, one of the several people in his entourage, he doesn't travel alone, would have read it and would have noticed that it said, Mr. Pompeo, tzedek tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shalt thou pursue. And he's not pursuing it. He's in a position to pursue it, but he didn't give us any response. No member of his entourage ever responded to us. We've never had any nature, any communication with Mr. Pompeo. I don't know if you can see this. You probably can't. Okay, no. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm holding. There's a book that's been beside me because I'm working my way through it, called Of Blood and Hope. Of Blood and Hope is written by a man whose name is probably not that familiar, Samuel Pizarro. He's the man who raised Anthony Blinken. He was his stepfather, and he spent some considerable period of his life living in Melbourne, Australia, which, as everybody knows, is the most wonderful city on earth. It's where Malki was born and where I was born and where I lived until we came here with 4 children to make Aliyah. Samuel Pizarro's book is in my hand because I found it on the shelf of one of my children who lives just down the street from us here in Jerusalem, a grown man with his own interests. And I asked him, Shia, why are you reading Blinken's father's book? And he says, because I heard that the trajectory of his life during the Holocaust, because it's mostly about his experiences in the Holocaust, match almost perfectly, step by step, Zaidi's experiences. By Zaidi, he was referring to my father. So both of them came from the Krakow area. Both of them were in the Krakow ghetto. Both of them were in the Plaszow work camp. Both of them were in Auschwitz. And both of them were liberated from Dachau at the end of the war by the Americans. So I'm reading my way through what is kind of a proxy biography that my father never wrote. And my father told me almost nothing about his experiences during the war. I can't believe that I'm in the situation now where a man who, for all purposes, could be me, the son of Samuel Pizarro, the son of Abraham Rothenberg, my father, who decides that the murder of this child, this Jewish child, among the other Jewish children who were targeted by this monster that day, is something that, yes, our heart goes out to you. You have our condolences. We have some more serious business. Could you get out of the room, please? That's the situation we find ourselves in. And if anybody thinks that I'm making this over dramatic, I would be glad to engage with you on real granular detail of the sorts of interactions we've had with public officials, right up to and including the leadership team around President Biden. I have to emphasize again, not against the Democrats any more than I'm against the Republicans. But it's striking, and Sarah, you said it, when the letters were sent to, there are several letters that have been sent in pursuit of our cause, either to the then Secretary of State or to the ambassador of Jordan at the time, and she's been the same throughout this whole affair, only Republicans have signed it. Now, if that sounds sort of hopeful, I can tell you that my efforts to engage with the leadership of the Republicans has been just about as unproductive as my efforts to engage with the leadership of the Democrats. And I don't think it's because they hate Malki or hate my Australianness or any other of these foolish aspects. I think that this issue throws up real challenges for the ethicality and for the principles of people in public life. And I don't claim to have the only voice on this subject. There may be people who think that I'm completely wrong and that there's another way to look at this, but I haven't met them yet. I haven't engaged with them yet. I don't believe that I'm wrong on any aspect of this. I believe that everyone else is wrong and that I'm right, just like the mother of the soldier who's the only one in step. That's how it is. If we believe in justice, then it isn't justice when it's convenient to do it, but it's justice when that's the legal arrangement that covers all of the parties involved. And in this case, Jordan has an extradition treaty, and every word that they've ever said, which is very, very few words, they've left it up to their judges, is absolutely at least something that Americans should be pushing back against, because in my view, they're being taken for a ride.
Thank you, Arnold. I want to apologize for all our viewers. We obviously are not going to get the time to go through all the questions that we received. Received actually a lot of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and ask actually the last two questions, and one of them will be for you, Arnold, and actually the other one is for you, Sarah. So the one for you, Sarah, to start with is basically asking about the letter that Emmett helped with to the Jordanian ambassador. He said that only Republicans signed those letters.
Right.
But certainly you reached out to Democratic offices.
Of course.
What did what did they say when they refused this? And the last question, and then the question for you, Arnold, is actually about the Office of Overseas Victims of Terrorism, which is, I believe, is part of the DOJ. Isn't it their mandate to advocate on behalf of Malki and your family? Were they helpful in any ways, or basically it's a useless office?
Yeah.
I hope you don't think that I kind of mince my words, so that when I say to you, I don't really want to go into the details of this particular issue, it's because the OVT, which has been not a happy place for us to interact with, has been responsive in other ways in very recent times. I think the real analysis today is we're no longer covered by the OVT, but because an indictment, a criminal complaint in the technical sense, was issued against Tamimi back in 2017, the OVT's work is done, and that we are now under the coverage of a different office in the Department of Justice that covers victims of all kinds of crimes. However, if I could reframe your question, Hussein, have you gotten much help from the advocates for the victims? Not yet, but we're hoping that it'll get better.
All right. In terms of your question, Hussein, we have been engaged in multiple letters going back to 10 years to 2012 when Representative Joe Walsh and then Howard Berman, who was from California and a Democrat, wrote a letter to then Attorney General Holder asking for the DOJ to bring all Palestinian terrorists to justice. 52 other congressmen then from both sides of the aisle co-signed the letter. No response. In 2012, we wrote a letter, Ghost wrote a letter for Senator Jim Inhofe, and it was sent to Attorney General Eric Holder and asking again for the DOJ to bring Palestinian terrorists to justice on our shores, as our 1990 Anti-Terrorism Act stipulates. No response. In 2013, Representative Matt Salmon, Republican of Arizona, wrote a letter to Attorney General Eric Holder, again asking the DOJ to bring Palestinian terrorists to justice here on our shores. 15 congressmen co-signed the letter. None of the DOJ responses have been seen, and if they did respond, they were incredibly ambiguous, using typical State Department double talk. And of course, we went on and on and on. As the years ensued, something's happened within, I'm sorry to have to report this, but within the Democratic Party, where they just don't seem to care about these issues anymore. And the letters seem to only be drafted and co-signed by Republicans. So we're hoping, I think that, the name of our organization is Emet, and there was a good Jewish boy named Jesus Christ that said the truth shall set you free. So we're hoping that, to knock on more doors and really to start pursuing this once again. as a major issue. And I really deeply apologize for any time that's elapsed in our rigorous pursuit of justice for this incredibly important issue. Arnold, you are a warrior and a hero, not just in the name of Malki, but in the name of all Israeli citizens and American citizens who suffered at the hands of Palestinian terrorists abroad. So I thank you deeply for that.
Sarah, if I just point to the addresses, I see that I put one address there twice and that wasn't deliberate. Karen Malki is the foundation that captures Malki's spirit. It's a charity. We do wonderful work on a non-sectarian basis. We have a lot of Arab families who have been helped tremendously. This Ongoing War is the name of the blog that Frimet and I jointly write. And most of the time, the latest details of what's been going on or what hasn't been going on can be found there. So I would encourage people to please familiarize yourselves with what goes on there if you want to give us a hand. We don't ask for money. We don't ask for anything other than moral support. But having laid some issues in front of your audience today here, Sarah, I am hoping that there may be a dialogue that might get provoked by some of the things that I've put out here in the spirit of producing better results for everybody.
Thank you so much. It is always a profound honor to talk to you, Arnold.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.